there is a lack of discussion upon what a world of AI entertainment will look like. The likely death, or at least a severe trimming, of the current entertainment industry, and what other changes it would bring about. As of now, influencers are mainly focused on downplaying AI, or calling it evil, or saying it's going nowhere, usually while cherry picking a technical issue or two and avoiding counters. With only a few exceptions of this, who are generally focused on talking about the day-to-day improvements that are happening. I wish to open up that conversation and potentially wonder about new highs and lows that said tech could bring to us. And a decent way to start will be taking a look at an AI anime that has been on my radar for several months now, due to it being claimed as an isekai.
再生数1コメント1コメントついたの
Twins Hinahima is a one-shot episode that was made by humans with AI assistants that involves two girls looking to strike it big on TikTok. Or at least that's the starting half-ish of the 23-minute episode. To give a tad bit of a spoiler, the show does not turn into an isekai. Instead, it turns into a VR story. In the last place, I would expect Guard's damn influence in popularizing the stupid labeling of all VR and game stories as isekai strikes once again. Bad labeling by Mal and others aside though, how was the show? Overall, after having watched this twice, I would put it at a 6 or 6.5, so around the largest median on Mal stats for it, ignoring the obvious review bomb of ones by people who didn't watch the show. Despite how some have bent over backwards to act as this was pure ass, either with overblowing nitpicks that the average person wouldn't notice while watching, or by the inherent use of AI at all for others, the end result wasn't bad. Besides the story bit of the TikTok focus, which had me cringing a bit, there was only 2 of 3 main issues. 1, the cheapness of using 3D for the characters a lot of time, and 2, the stiffness / stilt you can pick up sometimes of the characters if you're paying attention. It's quite clear that if they could get away with having a character standing still to avoid dealing with movement, they would. So essentially the standard usual one might be familiar with low budget 2010s or earlier anime. Finally, the story progression had a bit of forced acceleration / character behavior shoehorning, and the idea is something that could have absolutely been done better in further depth with an hour runtime, or even more, depending on how they would take the story. As for my praises, the music and VAs were great. The end-in story application, which I won't spoil, is an idea that while I know has been touched in the West a bit, is still one I don't think has been delved much into in anime. Considering how this is likely going to become a real thing for some, I fully expect this to be a story idea that will be delved into again in greater depth in the years to come. Those, however, were aspects that were done entirely by humans. How does the AI portions of the show fare? Well, to be quite frank, there's no real complaints. The backgrounds were pictures they took and ran through an AI filter which didn't have any real errors, but even the characters and the moving parts were fine, with only like 3 or 4 times in which I can recall me noticing AI fuck-ups, outside of the general stiltness on my initial viewing, with only a couple more popping out to me on my second watch spent exclusively trying to spot issues. Mind you, this animation generation did have human touch-up to polish it, but noteworthy regardless. Overall, while it was a bit mid with missed potential that would have been a 7 or an 8 had the other non-AI factors not existed, it wasn't a show I regretted watching. It was definitely a good showcase of how a competent team could use AI tools successfully, despite how primitive they were a year ago when they made this. Something at least Toei seems to have taken notes from, considering they are now going ahead with implementing AI into the production going forward. If you want to see the episode yourself, there's an MTL translation thrown around, which only had a few translation errors and was adequate enough to understand the story for the most part. So perhaps jumping from this to talking about the entertainment industry's quote inevitable end might seem like a bit of a leap. It's not so much a leap so much as skipping ahead a few paces. But before I shift full into explaining why a lot of the current entertainment industry as we know it will end and what beyond could look like, there needs to be some preemptive addressing, specifically of some half-baked arguments I fully expect to see at least one commenter likely use, and I don't want to spend most of my time replying to comments arguing against the basis of the future I think is likely coming to pass, when I would rather theorycraft about the changes AI would do to entertainment and society's change due to it. So these are counters against what I expect to be the three most likely arguments to see, and to set the basis for why AI content is likely to become relevant to society. Note, I am specifically talking about arguments against this future happening, not general complaints against creatives have against AI. First, no. The average person does not care about the soul or human perspective creatives like to use as a point. Most people care about something being decent, and in the case of entertainment, entertaining. And for them, that qualification isn't impacted at all by the question of whether it was made by humans or was based off of the creator's experiences. This has been seen with people buying mass-produced IKEA furniture for years. More recently, with more closely related areas, we've seen both the rock paper cross blades animation that released a couple years back to universal positive reception, as well as Suno AI when it first released and was talked about by people like Moist Critical, with comment sections showing generally positive reception from the average layman who said something along the lines of, "This is actually kind of decent." Now, Suno has almost 50 million visits a month. People don't hate AI or general non-human stuff. What they hate is ass, bad quality, slop. This is further cemented in a recent study by Baringa that came out in 25th of February of 2025, which although they really tried spinning the results in a manner to make it seem like people don't like AI by using specific language of, quote, uncomfortableness, if one reads the data, what they shared on the Variety article and their own website paints a different picture. The, quote, consumer attitudes towards content created with Gen AI and, quote, consumer interest in AI generated content by media types charts essentially speak volumes by themselves, with 67% of people willing to consume content that was entirely made by AI. That's without bringing into question minor details, like how truthful these individuals who claim they would never try AI or avoid it as much as possible are, or why there's 17% of people who said, quote, I would be uncomfortable, I would never consume it, end quote, for content that didn't have AI involved whatsoever. Survey takers skipping through questions without reading, or some sort of enlightened folk who refuse to partake in entertainment. I'll let you come to your own conclusions on that. The rest of the survey shows more or less expected results. A slight boost on average, 5% of people who are negative to AI. No surprise with the vast amount of influencer hit pieces for over a year plus now. Worry on potential untrustworthiness, unreliability, or misinfo of AI, especially in news domains. Overall desire for transparency and labeling of AI, which is probably for the best, as the study tested the participants, and they had less than a 40% success rate of identifying AI gen text/images. And old folks being the ones to not want to consume AI at all, at almost half, while 3/4 of 16 to 34-year-olds are open to AI. There's also desire to prevent human job displacement, which I will return to in the third argument. Also, not surprising, is that people who actually use the AI tools are more trusting of it, while those who don't use it aren't. Baringa tries to interpret that as people who actually try the tech end up becoming more positive to it, though I think this might be more of an issue of those who already were open to begin with, having started using it in some capacity, with only those with qualms refusing to touch it remaining. There is one section I found wholly unsatisfying and think they dropped the ball, so to speak, and that is their dip into quality and price, which leads into the second likely argument. No, the future is not a world where you would be expected to pay money for the same level of technical quality that you previously got that has now all been automated. This is probably the most ridiculous argument, The future isn't paying a regular priced movie ticket to see some movie that probably cost a few grand to make, if that. The future is a world where a person has a multimodal application running locally on their computer that is able to generate most entertainment they could possibly want for free. This is something obvious for people who are slightly aware with how open source has been making strides to try and match closed source AI alternatives for a couple years now, with DeepSeek being the most prominent recent example of open source news. This is a major flaw in how Baringa tested their study. They never implied or asked questions about how survey respondents would feel about AI entertainment being the same quality but significantly cheaper than the current human entertainment price, or even more importantly, free. Their questions were focused on the idea of AI being priced the same as human at the moment, and potentially human content rising even more. To be blunt, delusional. While it's true that this might be something attempted widely for a few years, it is not going to be a long-term thing. Once there are free alternatives, anyone can get on their device that can put out good entertainment of most mediums, which is what will lead to the death of most of the current entertainment industry, and is a nice segue into the third main and biggest argument. Majarbs. SB. If the current entertainment industry is just going to significantly die, or even completely, how would I get a job? You likely won't, along with a lot of white-collar workers and likely some blue-collar workers in 3 to 5 years. The biggest issue I have with a lot of creatives who have argued against AI for the last year or two is that they have what I call the bullshit creative image of the future, where they essentially pretend that AI is this niche tech that's useless in most areas, but happens to be affecting entertainment, which allows them to justify to themselves and others this idea of it being realistic to just get magical regulation to keep their jobs via banning AI use. Setting aside the core flawed basis of AI being useless, even in this view, it should only take a few seconds for one to think if banning the AI worldwide is realistic. Upon which, one should immediately realize the answer is a big fat no. A discussion I've only seen Asmongold brought up, which has been dodged by creatives in favor of getting salty about his rage bait, telling them things will get worse. No, it is not a realistic possibility to expect worldwide banning of AI being used for entertainment. I would expect some third world nations, and likely Russia and China, to refuse to ban it, which means there is a market that is producing content at a far cheaper price, or even free, than what you would expect coming from America with the same quality. What do you think will happen to America's creatives when that happens? A guaranteed death. Perhaps slightly slower than what would happen with AI use not being banned anywhere, but guaranteed all the same. And unlike actual material goods, there's no realistic way to prevent it from reaching American markets, or at least not without some dystopian levels of overreach via ISP blocking and criminalization. So overall, a foe that creatives are unlikely to win against. This was arguing under the creative image of the future. Now let's argue under the actual likely image of the future. The core part of this that's different from before is that AI is actually useful and is showing no signs of stopping. Just the other day, we had Alpha Evolve and Absolute Zero show the start of AI making novel discoveries, albeit in an environment which allowed for logical rules to determine improvement, and the ability for AI to make synthetic data that objectively improved itself, which solves the good data and model collapse problem, which has been something that disingenuous naysayers have cherry-picked for over a year, which stems from this inherent belief that we don't have researchers smart enough to figure out how to make some working form of evolution for AI to make it capable of self-improvement without human intervention, or making novel discoveries. Glad to say that my gut feeling was right, and there was nothing stopping us from doing so. So far, in my 2 years of keeping up with AI progress, AI has shown no real signs of stopping, with every week so far for at least over a half a year now, having research that objectively improves these systems in some way, whether that be abilities or performance or new architecture. My conclusion is if AI continues like it has, we will likely have the ability to automate most, if not all, digital tasks and white-collar work in 3 to 5 years, with physical tasks also starting to go, with the ramp up of noticeable robot proliferation starting at 5 years or even sooner as well, which will start impacting blue-collar work in the first world nations as well. This is all to say, if AI is this useful, what do you think the answer to the question of how many countries would ban it is? A single nanosecond should come to the conclusion that most, if not all, would absolutely refuse to pass it up. Do you think the third world nations of the world who live in poverty would ban such a tech that could uplift their nation? Russia or China? The answer is obvious. And due to how all these countries would shoot ahead of those who wouldn't use it, this would force countries such as America to have to accept it to keep their power. Couple this with catastrophic future problems like mirror bacteria or advanced tech like mind reading that without AI would be a nigh impossible to effectively fight against. Which means no one is likely banning the tech. AI is a runaway train, one that creatives try to downplay as being stoppable when in reality there is no brakes. But even worse is the inherent fact that while arguing that the train can be stopped, creatives and society are planted on the track with no sign of preparing to move. Our world works under one fact, one truth. That's people being the general best option for jobs. When people are no longer the general best option for jobs, capitalism stops working for most humans. When faced with this question, with no option of being able to prevent the change from happening, the train from barreling down the track, the answer one inevitably arrives at is that we need some substantial form of systemic change to adapt, which generally takes the form of some kind of basic income to people as the end result, which then neutralizes the main argument. How do we keep our jobs? Pretty obvious. We need to change to ensure we no longer need them. And what better way than a technology that makes it feasible to achieve that with superhuman cost reductions, breakthroughs, and organization? With the implementation of basic income in some form, likely to not be just a simple single tax, but likely a variety of things working together, hopefully at all levels of government to ensure some level of power distribution. This takes down the main issue of creatives, which is the ability to feed themselves. But not only that, due to not only creatives getting funds, but everyone, this means that the niche demographic of human art/creative enthusiasts, who are the predominant ones to support creatives, also now have guaranteed income, which means that the overall income of most creatives should expect to increase. This is what truly baffles me about the current massive complaining that creatives do about AI. You would think that anyone who has truly thought about this topic would come to the realization that this is a far better state of affairs for them, one that would allow them to truly pursue creating what they want, or likely substantial extra gain as well if they wish, but reality has been different. Perhaps this is just a case of the most vocal ones being the one to complain about AI, while those who are waiting for a basic income just don't talk all that much. Perhaps there are some more nefarious reasons at play as well, like where they aren't mad because of a perceived issue in living, but mad because of how it inevitably, pure human creative work will be relegated as a niche hobby, like people who enjoy human-made furniture, as opposed to getting something from IKEA, and are simply spiteful that they no longer has much influence and can't spread their perspective through the work. But that's unsubstantiated, so I can't give too much weight to it. What should be given weight, however, is this. Currently, most of our society and all of our politicians of America are downplaying AI and pretending it would either be another scam like NFTs, or at best a slight productivity tool. There was no better proof of this than the recent congressional hearing with Sam Altman, where 4 different congressmen essentially went, haha, just checking in about jobs, making sure the AI isn't replacing people, just simply boosting productivity, right, Sam? This is further backed by what one finds if they search up AI in Congress.gov. All of the bills on AI are spinning it as a simple slight productivity booster, and there is nothing in regards of planning of AI job replacement or basic income. To put it in blunt terms, the geriatrics are pretending like AI isn't a tech and simply a tool that somehow, despite the nature of business, won't be improved to where it can replace workers outright, and are not doing anything to prepare for it. The equivalent of sitting on the railroad track while a runaway train barrels down towards you and refusing to move. This is probably the biggest enraging issue with the inherent behavior creatives and influencers who argue against AI or downplay the tech. They aren't preparing for it potentially coming and asking their politicians to implement some kind of plan or committee to research how to ensure a transition period of job replacement to basic income to be as smooth as possible. Instead, they are wasting their time trying to find some magical bullet that stops AI from taking jobs, or pretending it would end any day now via some hype bubble popping. A time waster that will likely lead to the more harm of people who will end up starving on the streets due to the lack of preparation, thus leading to the government in turn likely doing an ill thought out knee-jerk reaction to try and fix, which may or may not have more consequences down the line. All this to say, if you care about being able to eat in the future, and this goes for everyone, you best start telling your elected officials to start preparing for a post-labor society. A world where the average person will not be able to get a job. A world where we will need some form of basic income, however that's achieved, otherwise we will be in a whole lot of hurt. The silver lining is basic income is more or less guaranteed. What isn't is how many people are on the streets before it happens. For now, try to find spots to keep you alive till that comes. But I think I've spent more than enough time addressing preemptive arguments and setting the reasoning groundworks for my beliefs. Time to focus on the likely what ifs that come from AI entertainment. First off, I'll reiterate, we likely will see some companies make use of AI entertainment to squeeze out every last penny of profits they can. This, however, won't be a long period outside of some edge cases. We are seeing some of this now, like with the COD AI art in AI novels. The bad that come from this, big companies will try and keep prices the same during this period, right up until open source local applications are made that achieve their same quality for free with minimal human input and tweaking. I expect this to last the longest for games, unfortunately. While AI will likely become capable of coding decent small games in relatively short time, AAA tier games with massive worlds, graphics, animations, models, details, etc. is something I expect to be out of the reach of purely AI for at least 4 or 5 years, if not longer. Undoubtedly, it will be capable of human plus AI assistance sooner, but I have my doubts on it being capable of doing so with a single prompt with no issues for a decent amount of time. So unfortunately, expect EA and Activision or other big game companies to try and milk these cost savings for the next few years. AI fiction writing, on the other hand, is something I expect to have improved to the level decent in 2 to 3 years in a closed source product, if not OS, potentially sooner. With how context length has made great strides in being solved, AI actually remembers all of what it's writing. This is essentially half the issue of AI writing. One, the inability to remember large things to be consistent, and its overly verbose writing style. If the token number continues to improve, it can essentially write millions of words with no issue, which allows for the focus to be turned to improving the style of the AI, which I expect to be an easier task than some might think. I personally believe there's likely a bunch of algorithms that have variability that allow for similarity to what a human would describe as good writing, but enough variance so it doesn't feel like the same exact person writing all the things you read, unless you set it to do that on purpose. So this shouldn't be an issue long term. It would require human examples most likely, so a bottleneck, but I expect AI capable of self-improvement being able to spot the general patterns of good writing in acclaimed work and figuring it out. Music is another field. Suno AI and Udio AI give pretty good results, and there was an open source music generator called Step released not too long ago that had okay default generations that was on par with what the two services were apparently making a year or two ago. So an open source music app or a model that has a good music generator might be here in less than 2 years that you can run for free. There are some criticisms one can make. I did some testing, and it doesn't seem like the music generators really have a good way to tell it to generate songs in a similar style of a given song, or to be able to give a song and have it tell you what genres that song would belong in its database so you know what to specifically ask for. A good open source model should be able to figure out what songs you like and generate similar songs in the same genres, as well as be able to potentially recommend adjacent genres once you like. Voices are on a similar path, albeit a bit worse. 11 Labs is the king, while all other closed source and open source are pretty easy to tell is robotic, but even 11 Labs still screws up occasionally. Could be still 2 years at least for open source voice capability to become excellent. Video is a bit up in the air. Google's recent VO3 was noteworthy. However, my guess is at least 3 years, but likely more, before we have an OS alt that you can expect a good show/movie from a single prompt without any additional tweaking. And it is likely reliant on voices/noises as well. Might expect the Chinese to be the first one to put this out since it seems less likely for the US to do this one. 2D type animations might be held up due to this, including anime. Artwork and comic/manga are something that are capable now with human tinkering, but not easy OS one-shot ability. So I would say wait a year and a half, maybe 2, and see where things are then. Manga/comics especially might be stalled a bit until good or decent writing is achieved. Most of all though, all these things need to be combined to an all-for-one model due to how most people are lazy and don't want different apps for each specific thing, which shouldn't take long. Capabilities are integrated into multi-models relatively fast due to the observed generalization improvement that's been seen via doing so. Coupled with expected improvements in making models think, we could see a locally runnable application having most of these capabilities within 3 to 5 years. Some notes to make though, I am basing my expectations on English versions of these. Other languages could be longer. And there's also a decent chance I'm being conservative on how fast the advancements given by Alpha Evolve and others like it could accelerate the rates of improvement in these models. The one time I made a guess previously, which was on 3D modeling taking a few more years to crack being AI doable, it was achieved between 6 months to a year later. Granted, we might finally hit a slowdown as well, with these abilities potentially taking longer to come to fruition, though I find this highly unlikely from how consistent the research improvements have been. Regardless, I expect the option of good, free, pure AI entertainment generators for the average person in a relatively near future, which means every Joe Smo has the capability to get this, assuming they have some decent device. This leads to pure AI entertainment monetization, at least publicly, drying up almost immediately. No one is going to be buying pure AI entertainment, or at least willingly, unless the AI entertainment in specific is something that was previously impossible for. More on that later. This, of course, won't stop tumors from trying to get an extra buck though, so expect this to be a part of a more general shift towards verification of legitimacy. In an effort to avoid scammers who will try to charge human-level prices for AI content, pure human-only people will likely have to implement digital authorization and tamper-proof methods of making creative works that are meant to be shared online. I expect this to happen with likely all forms of entertainment, but some will be easier to do than others. Perhaps this might lead to gathering places which have authorized lockdown systems so there's a trusted legitimacy ensuring that human creative works are achieved purely via human hands. This sounds outlandish until you realize that basic income itself guarantees both free time and funds that one would expect human creative enthusiasts to support. Overall, one should expect the arts in general, such as plays, music festivals, etc., to explode in activity. But pure human works are something that will eventually downsize to a modest size of fans in the coming decades, and will not be where most people spend the majority of their time in the far future. The two big fields will be pure AI works and AI plus human works. AI plus humans will vary individually on how much is done by AI and how much is done by human, but likely most who partake in its creation will likely lean more towards substantial AI usage, especially with those who seek to actually make something of good quality in a short amount of time for an idea of theirs. This will be especially prominent if there are any ego/fame motives, since the creation of pure AI works means near instant entertainment, which will shorten the patience that a lot of people have, which in turn likely means at the very least an uptick in individuals who will likely seek out entertainment that's finished, not ongoing material. You will almost guaranteed see some lower pricing on creatives who charge money for their AI plus human works compared to pure human works, unless it is something that wasn't possible or realistic by pure human hands prior to this AI development. The most realistic place for this that I can think of is real-life performances in other venues that could use AI and robots to further enhance the experience, like holograms or dynamic interaction with the audience, along with material goods like merch series, but far more varied and potentially uniquely commissionable. This might lead to society placing more value on physical material goods than even now. However, in a purely digital setting, it becomes far more unlikely for a human plus AI to achieve something or make an experience that they could justifiably charge the same price as pure human creative work, assuming pure AI quality matches human plus AI quality, unless it is something that pure AI with consumer-grade hardware can achieve. Companies with vast amounts of compute could use them to host MNOs of dynamic living simulated worlds that individual people simply couldn't hope to run on their average device. This would likely lead to an explosion in VR and be considered the luxury entertainment of AI. And unfortunately, assuming even a modicum of brain cells on the part of big companies means these are likely to be the places EA, Activision, and others will likely attempt to shift to once their attempts at monetizing standard multiplayer games starts failing, as anyone is able to get a pure AI-made decent multiplayer shooter on their device for free. Perhaps this might be avoided by the option of better companies, or some more altruistic group of people coming together to make their own versions, but I have a suspicion the cockroaches won't be squished so easily. Regardless, expect some pricing being done with entertainment that has the scarcity of requiring high computation to achieve that's outside normal people's capabilities. However, outside of these extremes, basically everything else is fair game. The most prominent thing that is guaranteed to come out of this new paradigm, which I'm excited for, is the potential of getting entertainment of whatever variety or whatever series or games you want. Expect AI-generated mods for existing games, always ensuring you have something new to try for games like Minecraft, Skyrim, or Halo. Games that serve already as an existing gathering ground will remain popular gathering spots in the future, and new IPs in the future likely won't get widespread recognition as people are diluted across already existing games and niches from both human and AI they happen to be into. Not to mention, new games outright in series that are either dead, like Blinks or Kung Fu Chaos, or ones that are laughably mismanaged like Halo. That's without getting into the endless potential of new games of whatever anyone could want, which would likely lead to a boost in smaller AR and VR entertainment as well. This applies to other forms of entertainment as well. Writing is a big easy one. Anyone can either get more entertainment of dead series or web novels. I've personally seen how 90% of long-form fanfics go on hiatus. This solves that problem and makes it irrelevant. Music, comics, shows, etc. Do you want a manga of a story you liked as a kid? Perhaps an actually good Isekai manga? Almost impossible to imagine, I know. And all of this could be coupled with enhanced search abilities. One could ask to find other existing media that was similar to something you described or enjoyed, and get a list of both human and AI entertainment that one could look at that otherwise would have been missed, along with recommending you to new niches it finds relevant. Not to mention, other new experiences pure AI is able to achieve, like interactive stories/games that allow far greater role-playing capabilities than before. This has been seen in its infancy with Skyrim plus ChatGPT Companion, but expect this in a far more streamlined, fleshed out, local manner for practically everything, as well as being able to do this with previous existing stories and games. FGO, but with actual custom dialogue allowing you to play any type of master you want, to the likely detriment to Claudia, is going to be my jam. There's also the likelihood of truly alien experiences, which might be seen as a new form of art itself, and the delving into non-anthropocentric stories which could do wonders for speculative evolution stories. Perhaps this might tie into innovating the prototypish smell feedback of VR experiences. Although I will admit I wouldn't trust a device that could make novel gases inside my home, but the possibility exists. This new shift does open up issues though. What will be the general decision on archiving? Are we likely doomed to some or most AI entertainment just being lost to the ether? Is it only realistic to archive the model and maybe human prompts? A likely decision, with limited storage depending on how much AI entertainment people make. Will the need of verification for human works lead to potential cases of gatekeeping by a few select individuals depending on the method, like the in-person gathering place? What about the dilution of the ability for new IPs to take off and get massively popular? Is it a problem? One could argue that if people don't care to congregate on shared creative media, that's their right. And for a creative complaint otherwise, it is nothing more than likely fameless talking. This might also be less of an issue, depending on how basic income is implemented. If basic income mandates some level of community work/interaction, a policy I believe to be necessary to ensure we don't have antisocial, misanthropic homebodies who refuse to interact with anyone with differing beliefs from them, like an advanced-like form of Twitter match blockers, this might be less of a problem. There's still the social bonding between humans in substantial margins, and any noteworthy piece of work likely gets spread through casual interaction like things have before. This, along with likely evolving forms of online connections to other people, should ensure some level of change preventing stagnation. Not to mention watch parties, or more general parties with AI entertainment that might become a more regular thing which allows for communal bonding over the same experiences. But this would likely have other effects, such as the death of centering yourself around a specific series, and instead focus on specific genre types. It would be far less common to center your online identity around specific series, as most people have their own individual AI entertainment and instead switch to more genres and general niches. What would this cause for IP? Likely more fans mixing up canon with non-canon stuff at least. Won't current IP holders hate it? Yes, but it sucks to suck. If you aren't able to make good, innovative, creative works for your IP for a good price, always know that the people are able to turn around and get good free alternatives instead. We need to be careful of corps and other dickheads try and suppress the right of using AI models to generate entertainment of existing IPs in the future. They will absolutely try to ensure people always rely on them for their stories, and we've seen how well that's worked out for Halo. Will the prices of pure human works be affected? Probably, considering that AI and automation is likely to make most things substantially cheaper, but it depends on the person. Someone might not charge that much for their work since everyone is on basic income and thus not care. Another might try and really monetize the hell out of their work. Depends on what creatives value their time at. Isn't this just enabling more consumption? Yes, but the question of whether that's a bad thing depends on what your view of life is, and the end results of the consumption. Some people believe life is finding meaning. Personally, I think the meaning of life is that there isn't really one, it's just an opportunity for experiences, one that souls purposely reincarnate to have for enjoyment. Thus, if a person decides to spend their time consuming the entertainment, that is a valid experience. Potentially a rare one if you believe souls can reincarnate into less intelligent beings, and one that only becomes a problem on how materially wasteful things become as that affects future life on Earth. Whether there's an increase in the material waste we do as a species remains to be seen, but crossing my fingers it's lessened due to efficiency gains. Overall, The future of entertainment has numerous issues and challenges we will likely have to face, but it also holds the most variety and potential, assuming we don't get any severe fuck-ups crippling it. I'm excited for it and what it will likely bring. Obviously, this isn't a comprehensive list of all issues and changes in entertainment and society we will likely face. I'm sure I've missed some. If you have any, feel free to comment them below. Like always, the script and Baringa links will be in the description. Have a good day, and see you next time.